Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, where inspired women talk about the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness. We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory.
We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way. If you desire to integrate this learning practically and supportively into your life, then Soul-Driven Motherhood is your space to go deeper. Head on over to nourishingthemother.com.au or follow any of the links on our socials for Soul-Driven Motherhood.
We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we're so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner, and today's podcast is a very special one. It's loving your body through your fertility journey with the Conception Psychologist Cath Corcoran. So we are absolutely delighted to take this conversation in ways, spaces and places that perhaps are new to you, and we hope at the end of this offer you some really heartfelt opening gratitude and places to continue with your journey. So before we move on, I would love to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au, scroll on down to the red banner, drop in your email, and you are part of our online community, which means you never miss a beat, and we send you emails of everything that's going on, so you are simply a click away. So beautiful Cath, Conception Psychologist, welcome onto our podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, both of you.
Great to have you on. It's a topic that we've only briefly touched on, I think, in recent years. So it's really great to be cycling back here and providing such rich insight and I think space holding, which is what you're going to offer to our listeners. So thanks for being here.
Very welcome. Thank you for having me.
I'm going to share a little bit about you to our listeners, if we can sit tight and listen in. So Cath is a successful conception and fertility specialist and perinatal birth and postnatal consultant. She is an experienced psychologist in both clinical and counselling settings. Cath has over 20 years' experience working as a psychologist. Her work has been within psychiatric settings, working for major hospitals rurally and for the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, in addition to her private practice. Cath has been called exclusively to work with and has passion to assist couples wanting to have children. Her focus is to bring consciousness to the conception process. Cath has been professionally pioneering fertility psychology in Melbourne for a decade. Personally, 17 years with her own pregnancies, including conscious conception and mindful pregnancy. She is thoroughly across pregnancy, birth, and developmental psychology through psychiatric employment and formal education. Cath works with individuals of any gender and couples who are trying to conceive, both in conjunction with assisted fertility treatments or looking to start a family and have been trying naturally. Her work is not limited to those who have never conceived. Many women she sees have experienced miscarriages and or have already had a child and may be finding it difficult to conceive or carry another child. Cath breathes fresh air into any presenting issues with her therapeutic approach and holistic view when working with people. She is a firm believer in the mind-body connection and treating the body as a whole, not as isolated systems. As a psychologist, she feels her role is to help people find their own answers within themselves, inspiring and supporting them to make shifts, to change and to transform, to thrive, not just survive. Cath believes many people still feel that conception and having a baby is purely physical. Her aim is to shift that paradigm, and her work has highlighted that the mind and body are connected, and that once people are conscious and aware of the psychological impact, they are able to shift some long-standing difficulties and ultimately assist in the process of conception and having a baby.
So many juicy places and spaces.
Yes.
So I wonder, Cath, if just to give us some really beautiful insight and safety around the conversation is, how did you get here specialising in what you do?
Yes. It basically is my own journey. I followed the path basically, and I started my career in psychiatry in hospitals, and with adults, and it all really ties in nicely, I feel, with helping women and men trying to conceive and have their children. Because I moved from adult psychiatry into child and adolescent psychiatry. So then it gave me the link of the developmental aspect. And then from there was led into infant mental health and infant and parent mental health. And so then I had my own children. And from there I really became empowered to have and create amazing birth experiences, but also support other women to have those birth experiences. I think there's been a major shift in the paradigm of birthing, and I'm passionate about women having amazing births. So that's where I thought, well, how do I bring my skills of psychology across to this space? And then I ended up having some success with working with couples trying to conceive. So it all just linked together, and I was provided with this space to work in.
I'm so fascinated by what fertility psychology actually means. How would you define that?
Yes. So fertility psychology I've started to use in my practice, and it isn't particularly something clinically identified, or even within the psychology field, there isn't something called fertility psychology. I'm very conscious about words that we use. I know that a lot within the field of fertility actually space it within infertility. It's important for me to use positive aspects. I'm not doubting that there isn't issues around infertility, but I want people to get conscious about the words that they're using and about the space they want to create. So I suppose that's what led me to calling it fertility psychology with the work that I do. It's becoming basically conscious about how psychology can weave into the aspect of fertility. As I said, or you guys said in the introduction, it's important to note that the mind and body are connected, and how do we relate psychology within the fertility field or infertility field, and what that looks like. So that's, I suppose, the basis of my work.
Do you perceive that when people approach their fertility or infertility journey, however they choose to identify with it, with an aspect of delving into their psychology and moving through the emotions that come up with it, that can have a literal effect on their capacity to conceive? Or are you more talking about it from the perspective of this is a way to really move you through a process so you feel wholesome through it?
Good, very good question. There's two aspects to it. It is the first aspect of moving through that process and working through it and dealing with it as best we can in that space. So working through each emotion that might happen. But I think that the other aspect, and the one that I'm really passionate about, is let's get to the root system of any underlying psychological issues that might, I talk in terms of energy, might be causing energetic blocks. Now, I know this is difficult for a lot of people to hear, that they sometimes sit purely in the space of it's a physical aspect. Not doubting at all that it's not a physical issue. What I am saying, though, our body has an innate intelligence, and sometimes we have to be aware that our stresses, our experiences of life can actually impact our body in certain structural ways. And so that's why I work in this space as well, is to really dig deep. I come from a very psychodynamic background, really like to understand where we've come from so that we can move forward. So in understanding the psychological underpinnings of our history, sometimes they know through even childhood trauma studies that if you've experienced childhood trauma, you have a higher likelihood of physical problems and psychological issues. So why does that not relate also to trying to conceive and have a baby as well?
Do you see common threads between couples experiencing infertility and past experiences? Yes
and no. I think I like to treat people in the sense of it's like a fingerprint. So each couple, it's not a stock standard response of each person that comes to me has a set of psychological themes or underpinnings. Each person has their own fertility fingerprint, and it's about then understanding, well, what are the major factors for them? So you might have one or two factors for one couple, but then it might be another set of factors for another couple or individual. So I wouldn't say that, okay, here are the 5 themes. It's about pulling apart within every psychological theme, what is it that's basically impacting your fertility journey.
What does it mean to bring consciousness to the conception process?
I feel it's important to understand that that we, if we become more conscious of what we're going through, we can direct our thoughts and our actions and our behaviours to support what we're going through. So when I use the term consciousness, it's about driving, okay, a lot of people get conscious about their diet when they're trying to conceive. Other people get conscious about seeing a fertility specialist. I would like people to get conscious about what are the mental health aspects and strategies that I can use, and understanding my own behaviour and even understanding my own family history around birthing and fertility and pregnancy that can actually impact the outcome. And so that's the consciousness that I talk about, rather than going into just having a baby and understanding, okay, well, what's my history? What was my mum's pregnancy like? What was my mum's birth like? Is that actually having an impact on the way in which I view birth and pregnancy?
100%. So along that thread, what does conscious conception and mindful pregnancy mean to you?
So for me, from my personal experience, I got really conscious after for my second pregnancy. So I did some reading, and I'm very holistic. So although, yes, I'm a scientific psychologist, I do sit on the spectrum of being very holistic. So in my personal life, I can get a bit more spiritual about things. So I got really conscious about trying to conceive, about not only just the dates that you're obviously having sex to conceive, but even just the idea of, okay, well, what will my family look like? Doing visualization, making sure that I was treating my body in a space that was nourishing for it to actually create a pregnancy. So that's how I got conscious, even in my own journey of having children. I had to personally do the work when I had my son, and then I had a miscarriage, and then I had my daughter. I did a lot of hard work during that miscarriage on understanding who I am as a mother, what my parenting looks like, even the fact that I was being so conditional around I needed to have a daughter because I'd already had a son. So it was that psychological aspect that I even personally worked through, and hang on a minute, you have to take that off the table and become more conscious about, well, what this isn't all under your control. So pulling apart that psychology aspect, the mindful pregnancies, this adds to why the pieces of the puzzle work together. I actually had not a stressful pregnancy with my son, who's my first, but I had stressful conditions surrounding me with my work scenario. And I said to the obstetrician at the time, is this affecting my baby? And she said, no, it's not at all. And as a psychologist, I found that very hard to believe that wasn't happening. It's only now the research is coming up to support what I thought in the last 5 years, that your stress levels can actually have an impact on your embryo and obviously your child. Mm-hmm. So that's what mindful pregnancy meant for me. I was quite clear that the stress of that experience had an impact on my pregnancy. I then went, my next pregnancies won't be like that, but then how do I help other women to have a mindful and supportive pregnancy?
Oh, I just love this. I love this so much. Since you've just touched on your miscarriage, one of the questions that I did have for you was, I saw in your bio that you also work with couples who potentially are experiencing struggle of conception after a miscarriage, or I imagine a loss of of any sort. I don't think there's a lot of space given to that. So I just wonder if we could have a little tiny deviation around those women or couples that are experiencing, I've just experienced a loss of some sort, and I'm having a lot of trouble reconciling how I conceive again, though I realise I want to have another baby, that there can be a space in between there that's quite murky. So Bridgie and I have both had miscarriages as well. And I mean, I'd love for you to share your experience too, Bridgie, but I certainly remember that feeling. I remember I had the miscarriage at the 12-week scan, so it was total shock. And then at that time, I didn't have a support or an awareness of how to move through that process and navigate it naturally. Now I would choose to do it differently, but back then I had a D&C. And I can remember being treated absolutely horrendously within a hospital system, and zero support around psychology or emotional states. No one socially no one knows what to do. No one kind of wants to touch the area. Everyone just wants to move on and get back to normal. And you're somehow stuck in this weird time warp. And then at the same time, knowing that this loss created such a cracking open of, no, I want another child so badly, and yet feeling so betrayed by my own body. I remember literally thinking my womb is a tomb, like living for days in this space with a dead baby inside of me before the baby left my body, going, I literally am walking around with a tomb. And I think that does something to the psychology and the connection that you have with your body. And I can remember being at my acupuncturist, and she's like, post the DNC, because I was having acupuncture back then, which is incredibly supportive. And she was like, oh, now you're just ready to go again. And I was like, whoa, I'm like, not at all. I have all these unreconciled, everything's in my body, and I had no place to kind of put that versus a self-navigation process. Do you want to share anything about your experience, Bridge, before we kick over to Cath?
I mean, it was very similar to that. I developed an enormous distrust in my body, and took me a long, long time to, I think, anchor back into it, because I also had that experience of the 12-week miscarriage, and I just felt like my body had betrayed me in some way. And it was heart-wrenching. It was my first pregnancy, so I had this also sense of like, well, am I going to be able to carry a baby to term? Like, what does this mean for my strong desire to be a mother? And so it felt like soul crushing at that time. And also similar to you, I also felt like there's so much that it's not simply just I get pregnant again. It's like I lost that baby. You know, that baby had dreams wrapped up in that baby, and when that baby was going to be born and who that baby was. It's not simply just, oh, just try again. There was a bit of like you, the Western medical system was woeful. I had a doctor who said to me, oh, it's just a blighted ovum.
Oh my God, I got that too. I wanted to punch every person that said that to me.
Yeah, it was so dismissing. It was like, oh, women have them all the time. That's all it is. As if my experience was somehow minimized because of some medical term that had been given to it. And yeah, of course, no psychological support. And also having a D&C in the maternity ward. So going to being cared for in a maternity ward, you know, with women having babies and you having that baby taken out of you, like that was really jarring as well as an experience. And yeah, at no point was any kind of like psychological service recommended or offered, or even that you might be challenged psychologically from the experience. It was, you know, and of course, like so many women, and like you too, Cath, in terms of your first baby putting you on that mindful pregnancy path, this put me on the most intentional pregnancy and parenthood path because of that gaping sense of being unmet by a system that I thought was going to help me.
So I know we haven't articulated a question very well here, but what we've done is hopefully painted a picture that our listeners can relate to, that there is a huge gap in the system, socially, emotionally, mentally, and physically, in this space of I've just experienced loss and grief, and I can't reconcile how to love or trust my body, but I want another baby. I guess I'm interested in, how do you see that space? What do you think women or couples need to move through before they're really ready to
go there again and all?
Yeah, wholeheartedly.
Yeah. Look, I'm not one to put times or dates on when people can go there again, or even tick boxes on meeting certain criteria. I'm again, and this is really difficult, I suppose, when people ask me to talk about this sort of stuff, and even as a person, like in my own private life, I'm very much about following your gut and really connecting to yourself and aligning with what you feel inside. If you're feeling that confused about where do I go with this and not getting any answers outside of you, then I get people to really connect within. And in their heart space, it's not head, it's heart space, and really say, where am I at with this? Am I feeling like I can move forward with that uncertainty? I think that's the big part for a lot of women when they have had a miscarriage and have had the loss. It's about the trust of the uncertainty again. When we have fear around the uncertainty, then it probably isn't that we're not ready to go again, because we're sitting in that space of fear, which, one, psychologically isn't helpful, but two, on a physiological level, fear creates all these different hormones in our body that wouldn't assist the pregnancy. So it's about, yes, we can have the uncertainty, but it's about when we have some trust back again around, even if it's not our body, but it's about the scenario, that we trust that this will happen and be facilitated. I think that's a big part of moving forward. You both highlighted a major sticking point for me. It is that complete dismissal of people's loss. I don't even care if someone goes for one session or two sessions, as long as they're offered that space to be able to say, I'm grieving, I had a loss, and I'm feeling really sad about it. I don't expect people to have to go to therapy, but it's just the point to normalise it, that it is okay to go and speak about this loss. It doesn't matter if it was 4 weeks, if it was 12 weeks, if it was 7 weeks, if it was 21 weeks and quite far along, or if it was a blighted ovum. It's still a loss of goals, hopes, dreams, that the child that we were wanting. And I think it's important to process those things without doubt.
Thank you.
I also, that part you said was really important about the hospital setting, and you're placed in with pregnant women. I have so many women in various scenarios, and this is really disturbing for me within the medical model, is that it might be that it is a miscarriage, or they might have to have a medical termination because of genetic defects. There's a whole various ways on why this is going on, and yet they have to go be put with women who have healthy babies and pregnancies. And I just think that's really uncompassionate and really missing the mark and not reading the room correctly for women. So, yeah, I'm a big advocate for that too, in getting people to, if they can't say for themselves to be able to shift the scenario, then at least be able to give feedback to their specialist that it's not appropriate.
I think that's such a valid point. Absolutely. That kind of broke my heart when you had that in your story, Bridgie. So I wonder if we can shift the story back to our title, which is Loving Your Body Through Your Fertility Journey, because I imagine that's incredibly difficult for a lot of women to love this body that they're feeling betrayed by or let down by, or isn't working the way it's supposed to work. And I have heard so many women lament on, I've fucking done protected sex for 35 years only to think that was a waste of time. Just this whole body disconnect, distortion, hating, anger. Like, I just wonder if you can just take us there in any way that feels really relevant for you in terms of just addressing how women are with their bodies when they're in a fertility space.
Yeah, it is. It's a massive space for women to sit in. Fertility is so layered. And going through issues and difficulties during that space is really hard on a lot of women. There's the emotional side of things, which is why I'm creating that space for people. But on a physical level, the amount, I don't think, and I was actually speaking to someone totally unrelated to the field and to my work, and I actually explained to them, I said, I don't think you understand what women have to go through to, particularly with assisted fertility, on creating that pregnancy and that baby. The amount of hormones that go through their body, the amount of appointments, scans, and you're right, and you touched on it even with the miscarriage aspect. It's that idea that you feel betrayed by your body. So many women sit in that space. It's like, well, what have I done wrong? They take a lot of responsibility for that. It must have been something that I've done wrong. And so many women will say, well, was it that I did this wrong, or did I do that wrong, or should I have done this instead? And so they jog themselves back to various times in their lives on, oh, well, is this what's causing my infertility, or for my body to be reacting the way it is? It's really tough. And I think that I only see the tip of the iceberg when they tell me what's going on. I think these women going through trying to conceive have a daily issue with feeling like their body's betraying them with not being able to conceive and have a baby.
How do you move from feeling a sense of betrayal in your body to coming back into a place of, readiness or nourishment, or finding trust in it again?
Yeah, that's a really important point. I love the fact that your podcast is Nourishing the Mother, because that energy is completely what I get women to engage in. It's important to sit in the space of what energy, again, I'm talking in terms of energy, you want to create for that baby, create for that pregnancy. And so I get people to connect, whether it be through certain words that they use, whether it's certain situations they expose themselves to, and really bring them back to asking that question, how am I nourishing myself? So I'm not doubting that we don't feel that anger and resentment and betrayal from our body. What I like to focus on, though, I don't want to dismiss that feeling, and certainly I will allow people the space to be able to talk about where they're at right now with that feeling. But my point throughout therapy is always, let's not unpack and stay there. So acknowledge the thought and feeling and the emotion, but then let's say, okay, I have dealt with that today. I'm not saying it won't come back up again, but right now, today, I have dealt with that. Now, what am I choosing instead? Because we're not going to unpack and stay there. So then it's about, as I said, choosing language that we use, activities that we engage in, and really shifting the perception on, well, okay, what are the things my body is doing right? How can I nourish my body? How can I start to love it a little more, even though I'm feeling quite angry and upset about it?
I really love that you said, sorry, Bridgie, I'm dealing with it today, not to mean it won't come back tomorrow, because sometimes I think that's the killer or the kicker, is the monotony of I'm having to deal with this every single day. Do you see almost like a fatigue or an exhaustion within couples if they're like, the rest of the world might be going about their business, but every day is like mental ninjahood for me, just moving through this?
Completely. And look, there's various ways in which we deal with that fatigue. I get people to block out their energy and their time. It's about time limiting focus. We have to create balance. Although we know what our goal is and what we want, we can't constantly focus on it, because you're basically like a hamster on the hamster wheel in one space and ruminating and going over that same space. So you are going to get exhausted if we place all our energy in one area. So the balance is important. Again, I'm not dismissing that this is something that is completely life-consuming and important, but I think to survive this and to get through this space, we really have to balance it out.
I love that, because I know for me, when I had the miscarriage, I knew I had this sense, if I put everything, if I make my whole life about having this baby, it's like it's going to elude me further. I just had that like intuitive sense. And so we booked a holiday to Europe, and I just had in my head, oh, if I'm pregnant, I'll just deal with it then. But at least I have this other thing that I can focus on that isn't all about having a baby, and we were pregnant then, so which was lovely. But then when you're talking about this idea of looking at where you can nourish your body, or looking at where your body is serving you, it reminds me of this process of almost like breaking the label that you have on your body, because I experienced secondary infertility after my first. So I didn't get a period for 2.5 years. And so I had I started to get stuck in this story of like infertility, and my body not working. And part of what really like broke that story for me was looking at where my fertility had gone. Because in the Western model, it's about infertility, like your reproductive system's shut down. There's just all of these things that are wrong. But if you consider energy is always conserved, then where has that gone? And as soon as I could see enough evidence that it was just somewhere else in my world and in my life, I no longer held on to that identity, and I no longer felt so weighed down by it. So that was certainly my experience. And I love that it sounds like you're doing something similar with women.
Completely. I love the fact that you're able to say, okay, this energy is somewhere else in my life. Again, this isn't the science aspect to the psychology behind things. I, as I said, very much like holistic way of looking at things. And there's I don't know whether most of your listeners would have heard of the chakra system. So we have the energy that we have around our fertility and reproductive organs is a certain chakra, and that's the creative energy zone. And if we even think about it in normal terms of fertility, it's about creation. So it's about understanding there's a timeline. There's a zone on fertility and creation. It's not like it, as you said, it doesn't go missing. It's about reconnecting to our creation and that energy and that space. So that's where the nourishing comes in, is really focusing on, well, where do I create here? Am I misplaced with my creating and that energy outside of myself, and really drawing it back into focus and look at it that way.
And you talked about gratitude too. It's almost like appreciating the form of where it is. Like, so I can love myself for where it is right now, which then creates more room for it to be in the form that I would love it, rather than me constantly looking at myself and thinking it's missing, it's not here, it's missing, it's not here. And certainly in the process of going through my miscarriage, there was that waking up every day and remembering, oh yeah, I don't have a baby growing in me anymore, and that reality, like it was like Groundhog Day. And so this is so empowering, I think, to look at it through this lens that you offer.
Yeah, gratitude is definitely important. And look, I don't like gratitude as lip service, as though, oh, look, you've just got to be grateful for life, just get on with things. I'm not into that at all. I'm very honest and raw and about people experiencing their feeling. Yes, we are feeling what we're feeling, but what are the aspects of it? What I call and what I tell people, it's mining for the gold. So when we're looking for gold, we mine and we pick up a whole heap of sludge, but there has to be some gold specks in there that we find. And that's what the gratitude is those gold specks. What did I get out of this experience? It was a horrible experience, but I learned more about my body. I learned more about my communication with medical professionals. I learned more about my relationship with my partner and us being a family. I learned about my support system. So although the experience has been hard, there is always something that comes up to be grateful for.
I wonder, one of my questions also is, Bridgie and I have often ruminated on, in order for there to be a manifestation like a baby, there needs to be space that's open and available for that baby, versus the couple or the person who's just super fucking busy with their life and they're like wanting this thing to fit into it, but there's no actual creation of space for that new creation to enter. But that seems, as I can read the people I've spoken to about, seems like very difficult to wrap their heads around. So I wonder if that's an experience that you see and what wisdom you might have to share on that.
Yes, really fantastic point. That's part of the fertility psychology. So that's the aspect that I get people to really look at, is what I term, are you keeping baby in mind? So what that means is I don't want you to be that focused on trying to have a baby and what's my body doing right and wrong around this process, but it's about saying, will my life fit in a baby, as you've both highlighted? Will it fit in? Am I busy going off to Thursday night pub night? And is one of the partners flying around the country, obviously not now during COVID, but prior to COVID? It's about understanding, will our lifestyle fit this baby in? If not, I'm not really keeping baby in mind.
I love how that too could also perhaps reveal for some couples maybe even like subconscious reasons why it's not happening, like because there's a tussle with what I might need to let go of in order to make the lifestyle shifts to welcome this baby in, and then the value of looking at that now versus when you have a baby and it's like your whole life as it blows up, right?
Completely. Again, yes, that's exactly what my fertility psychology model is. It's really pulling apart what are the aspects that are floating to the surface that might be bugbears for the couple or the individual in trying to conceive. It doesn't mean that that's the sole answer, that you haven't got enough time in your life and that's the reason why you're not having a baby. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not dismissing the physiological aspect, but it is important to have that awareness of what am I. There's the biopsychosocial model in psychology that I love to subscribe to, and that's the social aspect of what's going on within my lifestyle that supports us in having a family, and what do I need to tweak.
It's really powerful. I wonder how much the slight shift, I guess, in conversation here, which is around that theme of that strong desire and that wanting of the baby and the putting so much emphasis on the baby because it's the thing that's missing, and how you assist those couples and those women to when they finally do become pregnant, how they transition into life with the baby, because we do know that there are higher rates of P&D and other depression and things like that for women who've been through IVF because of perhaps the intense focus on that desire, and the immense amount of work that goes into creating it. I wonder if you could talk on that.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there's two types of people that sort of have the IVF experience or the assisted fertility experience. It's those that it's sort of like a weight off their shoulders, and then they just slip into motherhood and it's like, oh, I've got what I wanted, I'm okay now. But you're right, there are other mothers that actually are like, okay, well, it's sort of like they were quite, not intentionally, but it was sort of like having the blinkers on, like the horse blinkers on, and narrowing into the end goal, which was more about the pregnancy and getting pregnant. And then not realising, okay, we have to shift into the model of, okay, we're wanting the baby. And it's not saying they don't want the baby, but it's more their end goal was just, okay, I've just got to get pregnant. So I think that that's even part of the transition issue, is actually long-term having that awareness. Once we get conscious about conception and fertility, we have more of it's not just pregnancy and getting to that first stage. It's actually long-term about dreaming family and life and what that actually looks like. So I think a big part of that is even just getting people to, and now I'm speaking to you, I think some of it probably gets impacted because of fear. We don't want to look to past the pregnancy or birth because we fear that it won't happen because we have wanted it for so long. So some of it is processing that fear, but some of it is also having that hope and that faith that we will get to the next stage. So let's engage in some dreaming and hoping and what it might look like to transition into the next stage, I think is really important.
And I imagine would also assist with some of the potential parenting challenges that can pop up if you haven't examined that. Without doubt.
I'm finding a lot of issues around, and this is more developmental psychology, more when I was seeing children, as in like at the children's, or even I don't really see them in private practice anymore because I'm so focused on the fertility stuff. But before that, there would be sort of a parenting style where they didn't want to get their child offside because they wanted them so much and they didn't want anything to go wrong with them. So the child didn't have as much structure and routine and maybe know around them. So I think that's important to have that awareness too. Is and again, this I think links in also when people are pregnant and they don't want to complain about their pregnancy or their baby or their child because, well, hang on a minute, you wanted that baby, so you just have to deal with the consequences. And a big part of my work is normalizing and reminding people that, and women, it's okay to say, I feel sick during my pregnancy, even though I wanted this so much, or this isn't what I expected, but it's okay. I'm still happy to have this baby. I think that too many people have this fake positivity going on, that we have to always be positive about things, and we have to be honest. We have to be aligned. We have to be able to be vulnerable and share whatever the emotion is that we're feeling. So I think that that's probably a big part of going into the next stage too of support for women, is that it's allowing people to feel what they need to feel, even though they have wanted this and it has been such a long journey.
Gosh, I love that point so much. I just think that could be life-changing and saving for people.
Yeah. And allowing that two-sided experience, right? Like, it's like you don't live in a one-sided world, and it almost creates more angst and depression the more you try to chase happiness or chase, this sense of constantly being positive. And so to create space for both is so important. And that's really a lot of the work that we do too.
I wonder if during the process of assisted fertility, if you could touch on anything that's worth mentioning around the side effects, particularly emotionally, for women that are moving through the assisted fertility journey.
Yeah, really important point. That so many women are affected by the medication, and a lot of the professionals basically tell them to suck it up. You just got to do what you got to do, and you want to have this baby. It's just part of the process. And so I provide that space for women to speak about what might be making them uncomfortable, and also understanding sometimes the hormones can actually can affect even just our psychology and our well-being and our mental health, whether it be through feeling low and flat with our mood around because we're feeling bloated with the amount of medication that we're having to inject. Other people, they have to be put on prednisolone as part of the immune suppressant, and so they then start to feel really heightened, which can then trigger anxiety, and they twist themselves in knots around getting anxious about the process, but even just their body is actually responding without them even knowing why, and they're thinking, well, why am I feeling so hypervigilant or so anxious when I thought I was going through this process okay? So that's important to recognise, is that although I believe the mind and body are connected, and it's important for us to recognise when we're feeling low and sad and flat or anxious, it's important to remember that sometimes when we're putting these chemicals and medications understandably in our body, they still have an impact on us. And sometimes it's important to detach from that and say, hang on, this probably isn't my own emotion and this isn't my reaction. It's probably a physiological reaction, and it's coming out in a mental health issue.
I love that. I wonder, as I think about that, I think about the couples who are moving through an assisted fertility process and potentially finding themselves in stormy waters. Even though they both might have the aligned goal of having this baby, the actual process is creating some distance, and potentially what I can perceive is that there's the experience the woman's having that potentially her partner isn't really fully knowing, understanding, or sinking into, and that can create a bit of friction. Is that something that you see couples going through, and what might be the key things they need to remember to move through an assisted fertility with as much integration and harmony, I suppose, as possible?
For sure. I think even just that mindfulness of having the awareness that, okay, we might not necessarily be aligned together at this point in time and feel like we're rowing in different ways with our boat, but that we are still focused on the same goal. Just that explicit communication of I'm feeling this or I'm feeling that. Even going back to that previous question about, well, how do we feel with our body? a lot of women feel quite alone when they're having to do the injections and take the medication and go through all the procedures, and the men feel like they're a bit on the outer, like, okay, well, how do I help you? What am I doing? I feel like I'm a shag on a rock. So, again, explicit communication, where am I at right now? I've been having this medication, feeling like it's making me edgy, feeling like it's making me irritable. So then at least the other person who's not going through the actual process can provide either some support or whatever is identified by the couple and by the individual, I think is important. Other aspects are really more along the couples counselling side, and it's interesting you've brought this up because a lot of my work has actually shifted and evolved into, I do a lot of couples work now. And as part of that, it's about recognising, well, what are the things that are breaking down for the couple? And it might be just intimate time spent together that doesn't necessarily involve having sex, but it's about just having meaningful connection with one another. That can bring people back together as well. It's recognising a really important tool I use for people that you have both probably heard of is the love languages. So bringing people back to even love languages. What is my partner's love language? How can I actually recognise and show that to them, that I am loving them and I am connecting in a meaningful way that they can appreciate is a really good starting point.
So before we move into our quickfire question that we ask every person who's interviewed on this podcast, I just want to offer to you, is there anything that feels left unsaid on your heart, your mind or your body, that thinking about the woman who's listening to this who might be in a challenging experience of her own fertility, is there anything that you would like to say or that you feel is left unsaid for her?
Yeah. Trust your body, I think, is really important. Even though it feels like it's not doing what you want it to do right now, it's about trusting that your body can do what it needs to do, and if it's not able to do it, it will communicate in some form with you, with whatever's going on for it. So it's about listening to yourself and listening to your heart and your intuition or your instinct around what you think is going on for your body, and really connecting to that. I think that helps with the psychology of working with fertility and your journey. I think that's probably most important, is continue to trust your body even though you feel like it's failing you.
Thank you. It was nourishing even just to hear. So our 3 quickfire questions, I'll ask the first one and I'll hand over to Bridgie, who'll ask the second 2. So the first question is, can you think of a time that you would be willing to share with us where you have experienced a wound or a challenge of some sort, that you have gone through a process and mined some wisdom out of it, and we're wondering if there's an experience you could share with us, what it was, perhaps pieces of what you went through, and then ultimately sharing with us what the wisdom is that your life experience has gleaned.
Yes. I'm very much a self-reflective person, so whatever I go through, I always try and get something out of it, whatever it may be. A pivotal one for part of my journey, I think, that's relevant to I suppose, women and having babies and pregnancy and birth particularly. My third child, my daughter, she was actually sick, perfect natural pregnancy and birth, and then on day 2 of her life, she actually started having seizures. So I I'd already been sitting in the medical model as a psychologist within hospitals, but it really gave me the other side of the coin on how patients have to work through this model. What it brought out for me was really, and I share this with a lot of my clients now, with trying to work through the assisted fertility space and even just birthing and pregnancy, it's about really advocating for yourself, and I had to advocate for my daughter. It's about trying to draw out what you can when you are on your knees. What are the things that do give you that gold and do give you that gratitude, even though you're in the worst space that you could ever imagine. I was constantly in the NICU and the PICU and the general ward for at least 5 to 6 months in and out with my daughter, and then we still had a 2-year medical journey with having to work with professionals around that. So she's fine now, she's healthy, but it really gave me tools to work within the system and get people to advocate for themselves, advocate for their medical treatment, to really take control of it. I know a lot of people within the fertility space feel like they have to defer to the medical professionals. Not saying the medical professionals don't know what they're talking about, but you have to have what resonates for you within your body and your situation. So that's what I get people to understand, and that's what I learnt out of my own daughter being within that system and being unwell.
Thank you. That's a really incredible story. I wonder, could I just ask you a tiny clarifying question?
Yeah, sure.
Around advocacy, because I also see that's exceptionally difficult within the fertility and birth space for women and couples. What I'm asking is, what are a couple of tools in trying to advocate for yourself that you gleaned from this experience? You're like, that's really important. Everyone needs to know these things when it comes to advocating for themselves, when it comes to finding their voice, when it comes to navigating a system of care for themselves or their child that isn't, the run-of-the-mill, this is how we run this hospital system. I just wonder if there's just a little bit more nuance there that you might be able to share, because I know advocacy can be really hard for a lot of people, particularly if you have anxiety or you feel under-empowered in an experience.
I think information's important. So being forearmed with information and not, yes, we can Google information, but certainly make sure it's from a reputable source and move through it that way. I was lucky enough, particularly with some of my advocacy with my daughter, I knew some of the medication they were wanting to use or the way in which the process works. So I was able to use my background. So use your background or use people within your network that might have information. I think the other important part is be clear about your non-negotiables, so that there might be certain things that you're not quite sure on and you could be led by the professional without doubt. Other things, it's important to ask more questions if it's a non-negotiable. The other thing is particularly in the birth space, I regularly advocate and get women, if they want some support, to either get a private midwife or a doula to support them in advocating in that birth space, because sometimes them and their partner don't feel comfortable to be able to say yes and no to certain things. So this enhances it because the people that are supporting them know the medical model and know the information.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is, thinking about a book that you think every woman needs to have in her hand, what book would you give her?
Okay, I love anything by Brené Brown. She's amazing. So I would suggest Daring Greatly or any of the books that Brené has done and her TED Talk. I think vulnerability is really important in our world, and vulnerability is showing that we can all have our feelings and emotions, but also feel empowered to move forward with what we feel as well, not to constantly hide or feel shame or guilt for having less than positive thoughts and experiences. Probably her. The other one, because I'm aware of significant books that helped me, and it was You Can Heal Your Life by Louise Hay, the Bible for a lot of people. Some people don't like her work and find it uncomfortable with some of the information she presents. But she grounded me in the mind-body psychology, and I'm so forever grateful that she's put me on this path, because I can't see life any other way.
It's so rich for people to know too, like that you work from that kind of more holistic model as well from a psychology point of view. I think it's great. Now, if you could have a billboard on a highway anywhere, what would it say?
Yeah, there's so many.
You want 10? You want 10 billboards?
Yeah, can I have 10, please? I think the big one. Can I have 3? There's 3.
Sure.
The first one is trust the process. So really trust the process. Although we might feel like going backwards and forwards or 2 steps back, 1 step forward. Trust the process, because we will be okay. Each and every one of us will be okay with trusting that process. So that's a big one for me. The other one is always infuse your life with loving intention. Whatever you're going about with your life, have that loving energy come from a heart-centered space. It makes life a whole lot easier, lighter, brighter, and more loving with everyone around you.
Love that.
And the final one, it's more spiritual, but I used to have it on my business cards when I was doing general psychology, and it's the phrase Om Mani Padme Hum, which is basically the jewel of the lotus resides within. So my psychology take on that is answers are within. You will always find the answers inside yourself. You don't constantly have to look outside and look for the gurus and read all of these books. If you sit silently and quietly, you will actually come to some of your answers.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Sorry, that was I needed 3.
Oh, they were great. I'm so glad that you chose 3.
So, Cath, for our listeners, we'd love for you to share how they can connect with you, follow you, find you, and how they can engage in your services.
Sure. Easiest way is probably on socials. Instagram, I'm the Conception Psychologist on Instagram. On Facebook, I put some things on Facebook, but it's only a small page, and so it's Cath Corcoran Psychologist. And then you can Google my name and Cath Corcoran Psychologist. You'll find all my details. I work in Albert Park and in Geelong, and then the rest is online in telehealth, particularly because of COVID. So that's probably the best way to find me.
So you're in Victoria, and of course you're also everywhere that people might want you if you work online too.
Completely, yes. You can definitely work with me anywhere in the world. I have had clients in the UK, in where else has there been? New Zealand. I've had people in WA, Queensland. So various points, definitely on telehealth.
Beautiful. Amazing. So we will have all of those links in the show notes. So if you're unsure on the spelling or any of the taglines, then please just scroll down to the show notes on the podcast and you will find all of Cath's links there. Are there any other ways we can work with you? Is it one-on-one? Is that how we are best to work with you, Cath?
One-on-one, yeah. Occasionally I'll do some workshops, but that's been on hold for the moment because it's better in person than putting it online. But yeah, mostly it is, or if there's chats, I regularly have chats with people, or I'll have articles, but if you want to actually work one-on-one with me, then yeah, follow up those avenues.
Thank you so much, Cath. It's been such a rich and delicious conversation, and one that is rarely had. So I really hope that this has opened up a really beautiful pocket for women to dive into, to contemplate their own experience and to have a path to follow should they find themselves in any of the areas that we've spoken about today. So thank you so much.
And we're really thrilled to offer our listeners too that Cath's coming into Soul Driven Motherhood, our membership, to run a workshop, and you can have some one-on-one conversations as part of a group, part of our community there, which is going to be on Thursday the 17th of June. So if you would really love to connect with Cath deeper as part of our membership, you can do that at nourishingthemother.com.au and Soul Driven Motherhood. Yes.
So to connect with you, Bridgie,
it's bridgetwood.life, and you, Jules?
Is julietenner.love.
Remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
And if you're ready to ask, in what ways can I show up more fully, live more meaningfully, parent more wholly, and love more unconditionally? How can I mine the wisdom from the experiences of my life and expand into those challenges? Then you're a soul-driven, heart-led mama who's ready for conversations and a community that supports her journey. Come join Soul Driven Motherhood. We'd love to have you.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavour to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.